Hey, I'm Pep. Gonna keep this short. This is my first Talking Heads video. I'm going to talk about Candace Owens, who posted an 18-minute Facebook video, which has so far garnered 64 million views. I don't think you can respond properly unless you unless you're very familiar with what the person is saying. So we're first going to listen to Candace, and I'm going to try to summarize her argument in the end. For the first minute, it's an introduction, so I'm going to skip that, but I will skip right ahead to her main point.
Hope for the Black Americans that are watching will stick with you for the rest of your life. Shelby Steele said that the Black community is unique from other communities. Our culture is unique from other communities because we are the only community that caters to the bottom denominator of our society. Now let me explain what that means.
What that means is that the Black community celebrates, supports, and defends its criminals. After this, she will explain to you why George Floyd is a criminal. So let's go to it takes her about 6 minutes. I'm just going to go to the part that has the worst crime.
At the door, and she went to the door, and the person pretended to be someone that worked for the water department. So she opened her door and quickly realized that the person at her door did not work for the water department and attempted to slam it. At the moment that she was attempting to slam it, a Ford pulled up and another 5 men jumped out of the car, and one of which was George Floyd, came up to the door, and they forced their way inside to her home, inside of her home. Mind you, this woman is pregnant. At that point, George Floyd took out a gun and pressed it to her stomach. She was screaming, begging for her life, and he put her inside of her living room and instructed one of his criminal friends that was with him to watch her and to make sure she didn't leave the living room. So he was playing guard while they ransacked her home looking for drugs and money. They did not find drugs. They ended up taking, I believe, her wallet and her cell phone.
Alright, so that's the worst thing that George Floyd did, which in Candace's eyes, this was in 2005, but that makes him a criminal. And she's saying that because the black community celebrates these people, that's why they protested, and she thinks it's especially a shame because an upstanding citizen died in these protests. So let's go to that.
For no reason, right? Not only are we allowing it to inspire riots in which Black people are dying, in which actual upstanding Black citizens are dying. Case in point, I'm sure you guys have all now seen David, the sheriff that just was shot and killed because he was trying to protect a pawn shop. Please look him up if you haven't seen it. I'm blanking on his last name. His first name is David, who was shot and killed for trying to protect a pawn shop from looters. An upstanding...
Yeah, so David Dorn was killed in these looting, in these riots, and that is the real tragedy here. She says these riots are not legitimate, and she gives statistics for why that's the case. So I want to skip to that.
It doesn't matter what percentage of the population you represent. It matters what percentage of the violent criminal community you represent. And unfortunately, Black community commits a disproportionate amount of crimes compared to the white community. Let me tell you, 6% of the population, right, Black men, 6% of the population account for 44% of all murders in this country, according to 2018 statistics. That is what you call a gap. And yet white people who represent 60% of the population, we represent 13, Black men are 6%, only represent 50% of all the murders, right? That makes no sense. That makes no sense. A 6-point variation in a community where we are extreme minorities. We commit 50% of all violent offenses, evenly
Right. So her basic argument is that the reason that cops seem to disproportionately target black people is because black people commit the most crimes. She also thinks that it's hypocritical to single out cops for this problem. So let's skip to this part.
Accidental slayings or brutality. Did you know that doctors accidentally kill 250,000 people every year because of mistakes? Did you know that there's been doctors that have been arrested for being serial killers, that just for killing people because they wanted to? Do we protest and boycott doctors? Do we assume all doctors are horrible human beings because some doctors are? Or do we realize that society is not perfectible? People suck in every profession.
Alright, so that's pretty clear. Then she says that we should instead focus on black crime because that's where the most black people get killed. So let's skip to that.
Crime happens. It's why we don't talk about it when 40 black people are killed in one weekend during Memorial Weekend in Chicago. We don't want to talk about any of that stuff. We don't want to talk about Baltimore. We don't want to talk about New Jersey. We don't want to talk about any of these places where black people are being slaughtered by other blacks, because that would mean that we had to be personally accountable, right? That would mean personal responsibility. We don't do personal responsibility in our community. We don't do it. We blame white people, right? We only point a camera to white people when they do something.
Right, so instead of taking personal responsibility, black people blame others while defending their criminals. So then near the end she says that well, here's what she says.
See those racist comments? Oh, just black people gotta riot. Black people gotta be black people. You know how they are. Oh, just black people being ignorant. That is the perception. When people get to be anonymous and talk about us, that's what they think about us, right? They think that we are the kind of people that will forever uphold criminals as the martyrs of our society, that we will never take account for the things that we do wrong, right? That we don't have it within us to educate ourselves to get ahead. And that...
So I won't show the rest of it. There is, she also said, well, her basic argument is that instead of holding criminals accountable, they are defended, and white people see that, and that's why they're posting these racist comments, because white people believe in personal responsibility, and the black community seemingly does not. So in summary, her argument is the black community uniquely among other communities supports and valorizes its criminals. This mindset of defending its criminals leads to these protests, resulting in the death of upstanding citizens like David Dorn. The protests are not legitimate because the only reason that it looks like a disproportionate amount of black people are killed by the police is because black people commit a disproportionate amount of crimes and pose a big danger to police lives. Other professions like doctors who accidentally kill people do not get this treatment, which makes the focus on the police hypocritical. Black people die in greater numbers from other black people, so why isn't that being protested? The racism that black people get is caused by this attitude of defending its criminals, and the only way out of this is to stop doing that, to promote personal responsibility, to celebrate people like Condoleezza Rice and Ben Carson. That is her argument. I think that's fair. And the first question I had with it after I listened to her is why? Why does the black community defend its criminals? Why do they commit so many crimes? Why don't they take responsibility like all the other communities? Just assuming everything she says is true. So, let's start with the committing of crimes. Well, why do black people commit so many crimes? It is not biological. That's what the Nazis thought. That's not something I'm going to try to debunk here. You can look that up yourself, but let's just say we are all one species and there's no significant difference with black people and white people on a biological level. So that's not the explanation. The other explanation might be, like Candace is suggesting, is that it's cultural. So the black community has a culture of defending its criminals, etc., and not accepting personal responsibility. So to address that, I want to show some other cultural judgments that people have made in the past 100 or so years, 200 years, about other ethnic groups. So I'm just going to read this. First, a British observer about Germans. The Germans were too stupid, too individualistic, too emotional to develop their economies. The Germans are a plodding, easily contented people, endowed neither with great acuteness of perception nor quickness of feeling. It is long before a German can be brought to comprehend the bearings of what is new to him, and it is difficult to rouse him to ardor in its pursuit. Another group, the Japanese. No doubt they are lowly paid, but the return is equally so. To see your men at work made me feel that you were a very satisfied, easy-going race who reckon time is no object. When I spoke to some managers, they informed me that it was impossible to change the habits of national heritage. Then a comment about the Koreans. 12 millions of dirty, degraded, sullen, lazy, and religionless savages who slouch about in dirty white garments of the most inept kind and who live in filthy mud huts. These comments were all made about cultures that we would not make today. So in a mere 100, 200 years, we say the exact opposite about these economically successful countries like Germany, South Korea, and Japan. So, what happened? Did they take personal responsibility? Did they stop celebrating their criminals? No, their conditions changed. Their material conditions changed. They had more economic opportunity because of their national leadership. So Germany got a lot better after Otto von Bismarck. Japan and Korea also used technology to develop their economies and to subsidize that. So stuff you can read elsewhere. But the fact is, for these populations, the economic conditions changed, and so did the culture. Culture follows the economic conditions, not the other way around. Oh. So, if it's not culture and it's not biology, then what is it? It's poverty. There's an obvious link between poverty and property crimes. I mean, your rich neighbor is not going to steal your TV while you're on holiday, because why would he? Why would he endanger himself? What's he going to do with a stolen TV anyway? He can just buy. It's a case. Or if you're rich, you don't need to steal stuff, except maybe financial fraud, but that's a whole different ball game. If we're talking property crimes, that's just obvious why that's linked to poverty. Violent crimes as well, because poverty is very stressful. Poverty is it puts a lot of duress on the mind. People lash out, people use drugs when they're poor because their life sucks. Poverty is shit, and it leads to this sort of acting out, to mental problems, to the instability. It's just a huge weight on the mind of an individual. And, many individuals can deal with it and some cannot. And these people who cannot, if they had more stability, would have probably also not acted out in that way. So, for me, and actually for sociological research and stuff, the link between poverty and crime has been well established and is not controversial. So if we can say that the reason that the black community commits so much crime is because they're poor, then the question is, why are the blacks so poor? Well, let's go back to the 19th century. Here I'm showing some images of discrimination in that time. I have an example here of Irish discrimination, of even the Germans get some, Chinese, and I think also Irish and Jewish. And in this time, these were all poor groups. They didn't have anything. They didn't own anything. They were recent immigrants, and they faced a lot of discrimination. But over time, this all went away. They are now these are now no longer ethnic groups that live in ghettos. They are now well, some are still, of course, lower class, but most of them. A big chunk is middle class, and plenty made it to the upper class. It's spread out. That's true for all these groups, but not for black people. So then the question is, why did all these groups manage to escape poverty and not black people? So for that, I want to briefly draw a timeline for you. So let's start at 1619. That's when the first slaves arrived in the US, and let's end at 2020, and let's put a line between there. Here's 1800, here's 1700, here's 1900. So let's see. In 1865, the slavery was ended. So that's about here, 1865. Which means that for this enormous period of time there was slavery. Then, starting this, basically immediately you had the era of segregation. So that lasted, let's say, till 1964 with the Civil Rights Act. So let's put that in. So this is segregation. And then we have this period where there were neither of those things. You can see it's a very small period. And you can also imagine that if, say, a person was born in 1920, that they had relatives who were actual slaves, and that in 2010 or something they could talk to their kids about how their grandmother, grandfather was a slave. So this slavery business is, and this segregation stuff especially, is still fresh in the mind of many black families. It's just not that long ago, but what's more important is that you can't have slavery, you can't have segregation unless you believe certain things, because it's not very easy to oppress and to dehumanize people unless you think they're lesser than you. And so in the case of segregation, you have these people, and these are high schoolers. They are now in their late 70s, early 80s. They're still alive probably, and the reason that they behave this way to this black student is because they were informed by white supremacy. So these people are still alive, and white supremacy hasn't simply died out in the 60s after a law passed. So how bad is it? Here's the wealth gap and the income gap. You can see the wealth gap is 10 times greater. The wealth of a white family is 10 times greater than that of a black family. You can also see here, it's a bit old data of 2004, but black people earned 30,000 a year, whereas white households were at 49,000. That's a huge gap. So the poverty is a fact. The poverty of the black community is just a fact. Of course, we're still not to the reason why, but that's why I showed you this this timeline. the white supremacy that people had to hold in order to maintain slavery and segregation, it leaked into society in all sorts of different ways. It just had, you know, effects on the governance level, and I don't want to spend some time, also because others do it better, going into that. In fact, there's this very short video, 4 minutes, which explains some of the reasons of systemic racism, why it's still a factor. You can just Google for that and you'll find it. My point is this: the black community is aware that systemic racism causes their poverty, and their poverty causes the crime. So they know the cards they've been dealt. They know it's historic and they know it's systemic. They understand that systemic racism keeps blacks poor and poverty leads to crime. Now, Candace says that black culture covers for crime and refuses responsibility. But that culture is neither the cause of the crime nor is the responsibility stuff a solution. The solution for crime is economic uplifting, and the cause for crime is poverty. And nothing Candace is saying is helping with any of that. And that is why I mean, on the face of it, her argument seems sensible, but if you look into the root causes, it makes no sense whatsoever. She neither names the correct reason why this is going on, nor does she offer solutions. Well, that's my view anyway.